Good afternoon or evening to my confirmation class. If you're here for the devotion, please scroll a little farther down. You'll find today's devotion and the lighting of our Advent wreath. So today's, we talked about in the last lesson kind of an introduction to the Apostles' Creed, and today we're going to look at the first article of the Creed. And we're going to be looking specifically in the book of Genesis. So please, if you want to check on the book of Genesis there, we'll be looking at chapters 1 and 2, which are the creation stories. And the lesson focus for today is God's creative work in the world is ongoing. It's not something that God did many years ago and then just stopped. He is still creating today. And of course, the big question for this lesson is how do we know that God is still creating things? So we'll be exploring some of those things as we go about our lesson today. So the first, what we're going to do today to begin with is to read these two. There are actually two accounts of the creation story in the book of Genesis. One is in chapter 1 that goes all the way to chapter 2, verse 4. And then the beginning of, and then most of chapter 2 then is the second creation story. So I'd like you to listen to these two accounts, and we're going to try to figure out how are they the same, how are they similar, and how are they different. And that's going to be some of the things as you're listening to these. Start jotting them down as what you, if you hear something that's similar or something that's different about it, because that'll be the question I asked in a little while. And in Genesis 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was formless and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and called the darkness night. And there was evening and morning the first day. And God said, 'Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let them separate the waters from the waters.' So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. And God called the dome sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, 'Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear.' And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and called the waters he gathered together, he called the seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, 'Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on the earth that bear fruit with the seed in it.' And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And God said, 'Let there be lights in the dome of the skies to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs for the seasons and for the days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth.' And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God said, 'Set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness.' And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. And God said, 'Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let the birds of the air, or birds above the earth across the dome of the sky.' So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind, with which the waters swarmed, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree that is with the seed, you shall have them for food. And every beast of the earth, and every bird of the air, and every living thing that creeps on the earth, and everything that hath life and breath, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. And then chapter 2 begins, Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the multitudes, and on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. And then the second creation story begins on the second half of verse 4. Again, compare this to the first creation story and see how it's similar and how it's different. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant yielded yet the earth, and no herb had filled of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused the rain upon the earth, and there was no one to till the ground. But a stream would rise from the earth and water the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man who he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord made grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. A river flows out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divides and becomes 4 branches. The name of the first branch is Pishon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of the land is good. Bdellium and oxen stone are there. The name of the second river is Gihon. It is one that flows around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is the Tigris, and flows east of Asia, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. The Lord God took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in that day you shall eat it, that you eat it, you shall die. Then the Lord said, It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper as his partner. So out of the ground the Lord formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called the living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all the cattle, to all the birds of the air, to every animal of the field. But for the man there was not found a helper as his partner. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. And then he took out one of his ribs and closed up the place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought him to the man. Then the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken." Therefore the man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. And that ends the second creation story. Again, how are they similar? I would say first, God was the creator, the Father in heaven. And he created all the animals. You see that in both stories. He created human beings. He created Adam and Eve. And he created them in God's image. Those are all things that are very similar. In this second story, we hear the first accounts about the tree of life, and of course that plays a major role in the book of Revelation, which we'll learn later when we study the New Testament stories. And we also learn of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which again in a few chapters a little farther along Genesis we see plays out in the fall of human beings, or the first sin. And so again we hear those two things. That's a little different. We see how another thing we hear about is God seeing that when he created just Adam, or just a man, that he would have been alone, even though he would have had all the animals and all the other plants and such as companions. He was alone, and God didn't want that. He wanted us to be in relationship with each other, so he created a woman. And in creating that woman, he finally found a suitable partner for the man. Now, I think one of the interesting things about this is so many people today, especially when we talk about marriage, always look at the man as the man of the house, and the woman is his helper. And where it certainly says helper, but this second story also talks about the woman being a partner. And as we know, partners are at even status, don't you think? I mean, what happens when one partner is more powerful than the other? It doesn't work out so well. So I think this is a very interesting translation, that it uses the word partner for the man and not just a helper only. Again, it means that we are all equal in the sight of God, and we should treat each other equally. One last question before we move on a little bit is, what does God think of both of these creation stories? Maybe another thing, and I would give you a little hint on this, is in the first story, at the end of each day, or after God created each thing, he commented about what he had created. That's my hint. So you might think about that, what God called each part of creation. And that gets to this point. It was, what does God think of creation in both of these stories? So another question is, another part of this story is, from the very beginning in this story, God calls us to be stewards, to take care of His creation. So maybe I would ask you, what does it mean to be partners with God in taking care of creation? Maybe even comment, how do you think we're doing, especially with all the issues today about global warming and climate change, and various levels of pollution that we see when we drive down the road and we see trash on the side of the road. How good are we doing at taking care of God's creation there? So, the next passage we're going to look at is in the book of Romans. And we're going to look in the 8th chapter of the book of Romans. And for those who are looking for that, it is in the New Testament. And it is just a book past the book of Acts. And I keep thumbing through here. Okay, there we go. Found Romans. Now I just got to find chapter 8. Oops. Skipped all the way to Corinthians. That was not a good flip. Okay, in chapter 8, verses 19 to 25. And, yeah, here we go. Chapter 8, verses 19 to 25. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, we who are the firstborn of the Spirit, groan inwardly, wait upon for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For we hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we will wait for it with patience. So again, Paul here is emphasizing the relationship between creation and human beings, and that both were created good, and both now suffer under a bondage to sin. And again, it kind of gets back to that last question I was asking you about how good are we taking care of God's creation a little bit, but also that we both are waiting salvation. A lot of times when we think of salvation, we think only of human beings. A lot of times people will ask me when their pet dies, does my pet go to heaven? And I always think that's an interesting question, because did God send Jesus just to save us? Or did God come again in the form of Jesus, which we read about in the next petition? We'll probably talk a little bit about it then too. To save all of his creation, to redeem everything. What do you think? I'll leave that to one of the questions you might ponder and answer as we go forward as well. So the last thing that I'd like for us to look at today as part of this lesson is in your student handbook, your smaller book, and on page 299, it talks about what Luther taught us about the Apostles' Creed, and in the first article. And of course, the first article is, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. And as we learned in the Ten Commandments, Luther always asks, what is this and what does this mean? And he says, I believe that God created me together with all that exists. God has given me and still preserves my body and soul, eyes and ears and all limbs and all senses, reason and all mental faculties. In addition, God daily and abundantly provides shoes and clothing, food and drink, house and farm, spouse and children, fields, livestock, and all property, along with the necessities and nourishment for this body and life. God protects me against all danger and shields and preserves me from all evil. And all this is done out of pure, fatherly, and divine goodness and mercy, without any merit or worthiness of mine at all. For all this I owe God to thank and praise, serve and obey him. And he ends this by saying, this is most certainly true. So, who would have thought that being the creator of the whole huge, impossible to imagine universe would guarantee, you would think that this would guarantee that this article would be the longest of all the articles, right? Of course it's not. It's the shortest, only 2 lines. Maybe talk maybe talk with your parents. I see several adults online looking at this, probably searching for the morning devotion, but I would say think about, talk about with your parents or with another adults, does this really make sense? That would be the shortest article? Luther goes on to explain many things that God created. Our clothing, our shoes, the trees, the air, the food, everything that he creates. You would think that would mean a little longer article talking about God the Father. But I would also say maybe it makes a little more sense. Because instead of talking specifically about us as human beings and as cattle and animal and everything else, by just saying creation, again, maybe that starts to emphasize what I said earlier about God coming to create to save everything, to save his whole creation. And maybe the authors of the creed maybe thought about that. So, I leave those things for you to ponder today. Again, I will post this on the church website so you can view it again on YouTube if you need to review it again. And also, I will post the page with all the questions to answer and to email back to me. Again, my email address is rev, as in Victor, M like Mark, and then Creamer like my last name, Kreemer @gmail.com. And just email back your responses so I know that you've seen the video, and look forward to next week. We'll look at part 2 of the Apostles' Creed, which talks about Jesus Christ and all of Jesus's work and some of Jesus's teachings, and about his life a little bit as well. So, I hope that you have a wonderful and blessed evening, and I look forward to hearing from your responses to the questions. Take care and God bless.